Views.
Right.
Yeah, water, lots of waterfront property in both places.
And London.
And London, yeah.
Just a short 10.5-hour flight.
Lisa.
A hop, skip, and a jump.
Yeah.
Lisa, London.
We barely had time to watch a movie, did we?
It's a long movie.
I got Finding Dory.
Fun. It was on repeat for 10.5 hours.
Alright.
Yeah.
All right, seems to be working now.
Fantastic. Welcome. We're really glad you're here. It's a completely different thing if you're not here. So we're glad you're here. My name is Justin McRoberts. I'm the host of the At Sea podcast and the At Sea event series. The podcast and the event series both aim to highlight great culture makers, because I believe that what great culture makers create deepens and enriches our lives. You know, like set up spaces in which those great culture makers can not only dig into what they do and why they do it, but how, and kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what great culture is made up of. And Julie Bindel here is our guest this evening, and she makes a tremendous amount of fascinating, wonderful, and I would say essential and good culture. She is there are a number of things, and if you do any research on Julie online, there's sort of no end to the doorways through which you can enter into the work that she does. She is the co-founder of a law reform group called Justice for Women, which opposes violence against women. She's the author of 2 books, including, I think, most recent is Straight Expectations, which was released in 2014. And in that, like checking out the book, one of my favorite bits of any review I've ever read of anybody's book was this line from a review of Julie's book. Bindel's, this is a great word, is, I'm going to get this word, irascible, I think it's irascible. Julie's irascible, impassioned, but compelling voice reminds us what activism is about. Change can only happen when you nail your colors to the mast. And it's this wonderful description of, I think, how she carries herself as an activist, as an author, and as our guest tonight. I get to co-host this with my friend Jennifer Lahl, who is the founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture. And so instead of digging deeper for me into what she's about to, as a co-host, I'd love to turn the thing over to Jennifer for a moment to talk about what you were doing with the Center for Bioethics and Culture and the context that the CDC provides for this event and for Julie's presence.
Well, part of our mission at the Center for Bioethics and Culture is forming a conversation around these important issues that we think face the future of the human race. And we spend a lot of our energy working in the space of what we call third-party conception, so egg donation, sperm donation, surrogacy, how children are made, in the technology, the new novel technology that we have at our disposal, if you will, to create those children. So I've been working with Julie for probably over a year now when we founded and launched the international campaign Stop Surrogacy Now, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about. And I encourage Julie to come over because as international countries slowly close their borders to commercial surrogacy, India's closing their border, Thailand's closing their border, Nepal's closing their border. Why? Because women have been harmed, children have been left in stateless circumstances. People come to the United States. People come to California. California, I often say, is the reproductive tourist capital of the world, where you can come to California and buy the baby of your dreams. We're just here to help you. So the work that we do internationally has direct impact on what is happening here in our state of California as more and more countries close their borders and the American culture welcomes these people to our land. So I'm delighted to have Julie here. I asked her to come, and she was so gracious to come. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation we'll have tonight and hopefully leave you with a lot more information that you didn't even have at your disposal. So,
can we welcome our guest, Julie, please? I think by way of introduction and maybe again like kind of further contextualization, if you can give us a bit of your background as a journalist, as an author, as an activist, and specifically how surrogacy has become a part of and a more central part of your work even more recently.
I became a journalist about 15 years ago. I'd been a researcher before that, and before that you really don't want to know. I did so because from 17 years old, when I was fortunate enough to meet some very active feminists in the north of England, I have been campaigning to end men's violence towards women and children. And that's been my priority within feminism, and feminism's been my priority out of all of the social justice movements that are so necessary to make the world a better place. And I've focused for the last 20 years on abolishing the sex trade, which is just a minor task that we have to do, because it is a cause and a consequence of women's oppression. And it is measurable in terms of how equal women actually are to men. You just have to look at the sex trade to see that that's not possible under that system. And from looking at the way that women's bodies are rented out, sold, bought, abused for commercial purposes, pornography and direct prostitution, I would have been a fool or just not paying attention to notice that surrogacy was completely related to that industry. Not because surrogate mothers are involved in prostitution, but because the fact that their wombs are rented out to richer people for their convenience or their desires, and I will say their selfish desires, then wombs are seen as a commodity. The women are seen as dehumanised, and these women are obviously used. It's that interface between patriarchy and capitalism, and neoliberal excessive capitalism, which is, again, the same as the way the sex trade operates globally. And so I started paying more attention to this, and met Kaiser Ekman from Sweden, who is a great reporter, and she's written a book on its being and being bought, and it looks at the direct connections between surrogacy and the sex trade. And for me, it all comes down to the way that women have been commodified, and there is no part of a woman that isn't saleable or rentable, and it's always exploitation.
That's to some degree, I mean, your story coming in through the medical profession as a nurse ran into sort of similar kind of crises about the treatment of women and the exploitation of women in medicine. It's a little bit, it's parallel to your story.
Yeah, and it began with, the whole market of human eggs and the targeting of university campuses and women on university campuses here for the egg, which our friend in the audience, I shouldn't say that on Facebook. Wesley, is it okay that you're here? Now that it's live on Facebook.
It's okay now.
No, but Wesley likes to remind us, for the tiny, tiny, tiny human egg, it's so valuable because the cost that it can fetch. So that led me into reporting and writing and making documentary films on these young women who are being exploited, and their human body parts are being sold, which led me into surrogacy and the whole package. Similar to Julie's, you cannot look at one and not realize the extension of this market and how much the human body in general, and in particular the female body, is worth on the open market and often the black market.
And so just to clarify, when clearly the commercial surrogacy trade and the commercial sex trade, are both separate and very similar, but one way in which they meet directly and are the same is the way that prostituted women, often trafficked from across borders or within countries and cities, are often used by pimps to, they get impregnated and their babies are sold like another product. And this is not unusual. I mean, this is the stuff of nightmares, but it is actually happening. There are baby farms in Eastern Europe, in Southeast Europe, that are populated by prostituted women who are taken from war zones or from post-conflict zones and are left there literally to breed for money. Now, the people that go and buy those children may well not know. I doubt that they would know. I'm sure they'd be horrified if they do know. but they choose not to look. Because where else do you get, primarily, for example, in the case of Hungary, Roma women who are so desperate and often have been raped to be impregnated, that are willing to sell their children. If you just scratch the surface, you will see force, coercion, rape, and conflict. And this is very unpalatable. But the parents, the intended parents, will choose not to look. And that's what we're doing. We're choosing not to look at this whole industry.
Which kind of takes me to, I mean, you do your work, I mean, when in sort of the description of who you are, you're a feminist campaigner, author, journalist, and those things are easy to kind of divide out here at these sections of your life. But a lot of what you do as a campaigner, you actually function as a journalist. And so when you talk about folks knowing and looking, I mean, part of the role of good media is to put in front of us the information we need to make right choices and live well and more justly. And so I'd love for you to talk about, you just did what's called, it's a byline project. And for folks who don't know, which I didn't, byline is sort of like, it's like a Kickstarter for journalistic endeavors. So you can actually support a journalist who has a passion, wants to research something, you actually get behind a project like that. You launched and fully funded Byline project. Can you tell us about your project, your intentions, and what you've been up to since then?
Well, first of all, the state of journalism. It's not healthy. Newspapers are not in a healthy state. In 2004, I was commissioned by the Guardian newspaper, which is a newspaper that I mainly write for, to do a 4,500 word feature for its magazine on the international sex trade. And it involved me travelling to 3 different countries and spending time with the women themselves in the sex trade, the sex buyers, the Johns, professionals who have an expertise about the sex trade. And it would have cost me an awful lot of money had I been funding that myself. Now, there is no money for that kind of reporting anymore in newspapers. So in order to do a project such as the one I'm doing on surrogacy, the pimping of pregnancy, I needed to raise the equivalent of that money, simply for travel, for very basic accommodation, and to live whilst doing it. And that is what we need to do. We need to be able to fund the kind of stories that I do that do not have popular celebrity appeal. Because most magazines now, even supplements attached to serious newspapers, are totally celebrity and lifestyle driven. Now, for bread and butter money, I'm perfectly happy to write about how my dog looks like Princess Diana.
Does your dog look like that?
She does. Or just...
We're going to have to need evidence at some point of this claim.
It's Googleable.
Okay.
Or
Okay, good.
to write about food and restaurants, to write about, sometimes, kind of light, funny issues that really are, it's not going to change the world, it might entertain, but that's not what drives me. And so what the Byline project does, you can see it, it's byline.com, it enables people to pay for the kind of stories that they wish to read.
To some degree, what you're going after, there is, and there's a little bit of an aside, but there's a doorway back directly into what we're talking about specifically tonight. There's a lot of complaint about we freak out about media bias, and like anyone who's paid attention to any sort of news for any length of time probably comes to a conclusion about, hey, there's bias and it bugs me. Part of what you're actually saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, is you're not going to dodge bias. And so instead of expecting some form of like unbiased media, you kind of want to instead figure out ways to, as a journalist, lean faithfully into your bias. To say, like, these are the things that I care about. I have to find a way to actually tell this story.
It's not actually a bias, it's a position.
Interesting.
And it's an ethical position, and it's one that you can justify, where you quote people absolutely true to the context in which that quote was given. That you do not exaggerate, you don't take facts from Wikipedia, you certainly don't selectively quote a person who you expected to be helping you to highlight your point, but who actually surprises you by going the other way. you shouldn't be scared. For example, if I were to interview somebody who I figured had an ethical position against surrogacy, who then started talking about, well, which has happened to me, I was against surrogacy, but I now have a good friend who has 2 babies this way, and I've changed my position. You report in a very honest way, but that you say from the beginning, which is what I've always done. I'm a campaigning journalist. I'm not going to mislead you or lie. I'm going to report from the position of a campaigner. Now, there are plenty of people who can write about surrogacy from a favourable point of view, and they're not coming at this in any kind of neutral way. Nobody ever does. And this is something that those of us who are against the exploitation of women are told constantly. Those of us that actually critique men's violence are told that we're biased, we're hysterical, we're pearl clutchers, we're anti-sex and we hate men. Those that say that the most liberating thing that a woman can do is lap dance, or that men are routinely falsely accused of rape, are never accused of bias. So I just think that as long as there's honesty, we can do away with this notion that there are reporters who bring none of themselves to the story. I've never been a news reporter, but if you just read a straight news report, you could pick out 5, 6 points of leaning towards a particular position, even in a straightforward reporting on a house fire. For example, there was a story in the north of Ireland recently. It was a classic family annihilation case where the violent man who'd been rejected by his wife had killed his children, and I think that he'd killed his ex-partner, but either that or he'd taken his own life. And the reporter did what they, I'm sure, thought was just giving the facts of the story. That reporter had us all believe that this was a tragedy, that there was no murder involved, that this was as tragic for him as it was for the children who'd been murdered. What do you do with a bias like that?
So your project, taking your passion and your understanding of the role that surrogacy plays in the exploitation web. You've traveled to Thailand and India and Ukraine. Can you tell me about where are you going, who are you meeting with? As you describe it, you're uncovering clinicians who are renting wombs out for profit. You're speaking with couples who are outsourcing pregnancy, and you're also talking directly with surrogates themselves. Can you share a little about your experience and what the projects look like since you started it?
Yes, I haven't yet been to Thailand, but when I was in India, I was told. Let me backtrack. I visited Gujarat, the capital, the surrogacy capital of India, where there are hundreds of IVF clinics that provide surrogacy services. The week before I travelled there, they changed the law so that foreigners, unless they had an Indian spouse or a spouse of Indian origin, you could not access this service. I was lucky enough to have a friend of Indian origin who just happened to be travelling with me. She became my sister-in-law. And, of course, I was married to her brother. This was the story. And I was told by my husband, this is your last chance, you're 54, if we don't have a baby, I'm going to leave you. So I was going there to see if I could access one. And they were perfectly happy to let my friend sign the papers, knowing that I was going to be bringing this child up if we had this surrogacy arrangement. And what was particularly appalling was that the only questions asked were about what we could afford. And I was told by one clinician that it was too difficult because the government had said, you know, we've put a hold on foreigners coming in and accessing surrogacy. Go to Thailand, that's the next place. They'll even do sex selection for you. Wow. The most disturbing thing, I think, of everything that I saw in Gujarat when we visited 4 clinics and spoke to a number of people involved in the industry was one clinic which wasn't even the worst, it wasn't the filthiest, it wasn't, for example, the clinic where all the petri dishes and the bed on which the women lay to give birth were filthy. But it was the woman who was talking me through what I would have to do to find a surrogate. And she showed me the photos of the surrogate women, and they were mainly illiterate, although she told us that they were middle-class women, mostly. They were presumably just doing it for fun. And I said to her, look, I'm a little bit disturbed about what I've seen on TV. Do they have to live in a colony? Do they have to live in some kind of lockdown hostel so that you can monitor them day and night? She said, no. Some clinics do that, we don't. And I said, oh, where do they live? She says, oh, well, we can do that if you'd have to pay. And I said, okay, well, do any of the women ever get pressurised to do it by their husbands? No, she said. I said, well, have you ever come across any domestic violence during the woman's pregnancy? She said, yes, we did once. We did. He'd beaten her. She came to me, excuse me, so we put her in surrogacy house until she'd had the baby. Then we sent her back to him. Okay. And then as I was leaving that particular clinic, there were pictures all over the wall of new babies being held by the parents, the commissioning parents. Of course the surrogates were nowhere in sight. And I'd said, how much are the eggs of white women compared to Indian women? And they'd explained that white eggs are 4 times more expensive. Because this is racism and colonisation. So it's richer European and white North American people, etc., coming to buy a baby from the womb of brown women, poor women. But I said, are most of your clients white? Yes, they have eggs from white donors. We know that they're sellers, not donors. And but the Indian women carry them, but there's no relationship, meaning your baby won't come out in any way tarred by the fact that it's been in the womb of a brown woman. But on the way out, she pointed to a photograph of a woman holding a baby, and the baby looked dark hair, and the woman was white and smiling. She said, look, this woman, she wanted an Indian egg donor. And I said, oh, why? Is her husband Indian? No, her husband's white. She wanted a baby with black hair.
Well, that's one way to get it.
Yeah. And it's one way to bring up a mixed race baby, take it away from its country and its culture, and to raise it in a white family, and let's just sit back and see the effects on that.
Yeah. So these stories, the outsourcing, the industry, the sort of this is happening in India, and like your experience has been that as those things are getting shut down, people are actually replicating systems to some degree like that in the States. Can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, our work is really focused on what's happening here in the United States. So we are one of the only organizations that reported on a surrogate death in Idaho last year. She was pregnant with twins, caring for a couple in Spain. Again, accentuating the point that this is a global trafficking tourism problem. This is all illegal in Spain, so where do Spanish people come? They come to the United States. This is a surrogate mother who was 1 day away from a full-term, healthy pregnancy delivery, and in the matter of minutes, she and the twins she was carrying all died. We couldn't get the Attorney General in the state of Idaho to call about an investigation. The obituary was in the newspaper. A Baptist church in Idaho. I called the clergy, the pastors of the church, and said, I see that you had a funeral service for Brooke Brown. Can you tell me what happened to the children? Oh, we have no idea. We don't know what happened to them. It's just absolutely appalling. I was just contacted this week by a surrogate in Houston, Texas, who is just devastated with how she was treated. She has medical bills from her paid surrogacy contract that have not been covered by the intended parent. I asked her, how did you find me? She said, I went to Google, I kept searching, and no matter how I searched, it kept leading me back to you and your work. So here we are in California, scrambling to try to find a woman in Houston, Texas, psychological counseling, because this woman is just devastated with how she's been treated. And so my European counterparts came to me, Renata Klein at Finrage in Australia came to me and said, we need a document from you to our country, because the whole world says, if we just do it like America does it, it will all be great. And so the world, as they shut down their borders, are saying, let's be like America, because everything works wonderful here. We had 2 surrogates last year in California, both carrying triplets, who signed contracts that said that they would reduce the pregnancy down if the intended parents told them to do. The intended parents said, oh, we don't want 3 babies, you need to reduce the pregnancies down. You signed a contract saying that you would. Both of these women said, we can't do it. We feel conflicted now because the pregnancies were normal, healthy, the children were, everything looked good. They didn't want to abide by the contract, then they were bullied by the intended parents. You're in breach of your contract, we're not going to pay you, we're not going to cover your health care insurance. Again, they go to the internet, they call the CBC. Here in Pleasant Hill, California, can you get us legal counsel, because these women are low income. They're oftentimes doing this for money, which means they don't have money to go find an attorney. I mean, this is the reality in America. As the world closes their borders, they look to us as the beacon of how to ethically rent wombs and buy and sell children.
Now, the tragedy and the darkness of those stories, the flip side to that, or at least the doorway through which folks enter in, is childlessness, which in the way we normally understand it and experience childlessness, it's tragic, it's incredibly sad, and there is, I would suggest, like a necessary empathy and compassion for folks who want kids and can't, etc. Your take on this, there's actually you've written a bunch in this direction. I was reading a piece of yours, and an image from a book I read recently popped in my mind. Buddy wrote a book about her own journey, kind of a self-identity journey. Came to a point in which she recognized at some point that she probably wasn't going to have kids, and she didn't actually get, up until like she had heard, like you may not have kids, how deeply ingrained in her identity that was, that like, if I can't have kids, I'm not sure I know who I am. So she's like wrestling through this like identity crisis about childlessness. She's at a friend's house and comes up to this image, this kind of painting on their wall of their family's family tree. And the family tree branches off, and it branches off, but then like every once in a while there's like this nub. And then there's a nub over here. And the nubs represented specifically the women in that family who didn't pass on the family, who were like, that's kind of the end of that story. And it grieved her, and so far as like, I don't want to be a nub on a family tree. In fact, I don't want to identify myself with that. And so she had to kind of re-engage with, what does it look like to be fruitful as a woman who's not going to bear kids? And so some of the stuff you've written speaks to that. And so I love this line you said: to accuse childless people of not having a stake in the future is absurd. And then you said, I too have a family, it just doesn't include kids. Can you talk a little bit about childlessness as a way of living rather than just a tragic circumstance?
Well, I do use the term child-free, I have to say, and absolutely, no slight on anyone who is broody every year, wants to have as many babies as they wish. I've just seen the most delightful baby over there, and as much as it's been my positive choice not to have children, I really do understand those that wish to be around children. But the freer that women get through feminism and through liberation that we're on the road to, the fewer children women have. Societies where women have the least freedom, the more children women have. And it's difficult to talk about women making a positive choice to have children when there are so many restrictions on us that it becomes almost impossible to reject that socialisation, to reject the notion that you are not a real woman or worthwhile if you don't have children. And of course, there's another thing which disturbs me, and I think you can see that quote that was up there earlier on, that it's a real problem when people are using surrogacy in order to reproduce children in their own image, when there are children that need our care and love and attention. And I understand that adoption and fostering can be difficult. So can biological children. We know all of this. We know that that things can be difficult. And I think we need to support each other in overcoming those barriers to having, to the process of adoption, to get rid of the unnecessary red tape whilst keeping the protection for the children that are going to be living with a new family. There are more and more children that, of course, are going to be abandoned, often not because they're unwanted by the mothers or the parents, but because of the impossible task of taking care for them, especially with world conflict, with global conflict, with climate change, with all kinds of atrocities that are happening in the world now. And if surrogacy becomes further normalised, and it's an option that is the easier option for those that can afford it, I worry that adoption and fostering will become out of fashion, certainly amongst some communities. Now, when I talk about the growing phenomenon of gay men accessing surrogacy services, I'm very clear. The majority of those that are commissioning babies from surrogacy services are heterosexual couples. That remains the same. But the normalisation of surrogacy for this community has been disastrous, because the discourse around this is of human rights. It's of gay men's rights to have children. It's about homophobia, preventing men from having children. Well, actually, that has been a terrible discrimination for a long, long time. And many of us fought to change those rules and those laws that stop gay people and lesbians from raising their own families. And legally, at least, those laws have been corrected in a number of countries in the West. And if we're talking about California, I think we understand that it is perfectly possible for gay men to adopt and to foster and to have responsibility, parent responsibilities for children within their networks. Now, it's not even about competing rights, gay men's rights competing with the surrogate woman. It's actually about the gay men having no right at all to have children. None of us have a human right to have our own children. We just don't. But there is a right for women not to be abused in this way. And I would extend that to altruistic surrogacy, because the poster girl of altruistic surrogacy is exactly the same as the happy hooker in prostitution. She's the 1%, we call her. She exists, but she is so unrepresentative of the rest of the women that it's unfair to hold her up as an example. She's a shield. She's a human shield for those women who are desperate, who are abused, who are in the situation that Jennifer's talked about. And also, altruistic surrogacy comes with a huge price. And I don't think you can talk about women making a free choice, even if it is one of those rare cases of altruistic surrogacy. Bearing in mind the pressure on women to reproduce, to pander to men, to use their wombs in ways that patriarchy has trained us to do.
You keep coming back to, I mean, you've used the word feminism a number of times, and you keep coming back to these really interesting, for me, more nuanced understandings of the word and of feminism. That even insofar as not being, how should I say, your stand against pornography or sex work is rooted in feminism, which in my understanding or like former conversations, like pornography is an expression of feminine power, and in the same way that sex work can. I'd love for you to break down a little bit what you mean when you're talking about your feminism, because some of what I hear you say is it's not just a matter of having power and expressing power and that makes you a feminist. it sounds like there are practices, there are conclusions you can come to, even in expression of power, that are not feminist conclusions, like pornography as an example, sex work as an example. Can you break that down a little bit for me?
Well, feminism, like any social justice movement, has an ideology, has a set of aims and objectives and a direction. It's exactly like the Black Civil Rights Movement has a set of aims and objectives. It's not a kind of free-for-all where somebody can say, hey, I'm an anti-racist activist, but I don't think that you should have laws protecting us from white racism because it infantilises us. I mean, that person would actually be told very firmly that this does not fit with the Black Civil Rights Movement. It's the same with feminism. It's not enough to have a vagina and a big mouth to call yourself a feminist, right? That is what we call a powerful woman. It doesn't mean that she's actually campaigning alongside her sisters for social change for everyone. It's not enough to spend your whole time screaming about how few women there are in the boardrooms and cracking the glass ceiling, because I care much more about women in the basement than I do about women at the top of some big corporation. I'm not saying it's not a very strong indication of sexism that there are fewer women who are chief execs.
But you're saying
really
that there's this rooted work, and that the actual measure of feminism might have more to do with what's happening with exploited women.
Yeah, the women at the bottom. The women at the bottom are indicative of how strong patriarchy is. And what I call fun feminists, the ones who practice the kind of feminism that men like, a clue is, if men like the kind of feminism that you're expressing, it's not working. Now, this is absolutely no disrespect to any man in this room, but you know this. If you don't feel uncomfortable with being challenged by your power, and I say this as a white person who has been challenged about my position on things by people of colour, then it's really not working. If you see men on the sidewalk clapping women in bikinis or bare-breasted on a slut march, you know it's the kind of feminism that's never going to threaten them. Now, the good news is that radical feminists are men's best friend. We absolutely are, because we know that you are not born bad. We don't think you are programmed to rape or to hurt women. We know that you're human beings without any badness that is endemic, biologically programmed, or in any way neurological, right? This is just about patriarchy and social construction. Nor do we believe that girls are born victims and passive. So we just see it as the corruption of power and those men who choose to take advantage of that. When men say things like, well, we couldn't help ourselves, we paid for sex because we have to do this or we'll explode. We'll have to go out and...
I really want to see the science on that.
We'll have to go out and, attack some real woman. We say to them, okay, you're the ones now who are saying all men are potential rapists. We've never said this. Feminists never say that. What we say is power corrupts, and men can not be like this and even change. The worst case scenario, human beings actually are rehabilitatable. But in terms of this issue, in terms of surrogacy, I do think it's an expression of male supremacy, of male power. Because, yes, of course, women are, the only sex that can reproduce. And if men feel that this is something that they're missing out on, or want their own family, and they're a gay male couple or a single man, then people feel sympathetic. They say, but you're denying him the right to have that baby. Well, as I said earlier, it's actually not a right. And we have to look at the way that women are oppressed through our reproduction, and that we have barely any rights over our reproduction and the means of reproduction. And so to then rent out wombs further compounds that womb as separate from the whole human being. And it further perpetuates the notion that you can outsource pregnancy like another service. And California is really interesting because, of course, it does appear to be the state, within a country that affords human rights, and that the women are not poor and black in the main that carry the children. But it's the same deal. The women in India who are extremely poor and very desperate are actually the same, relatively speaking, as the hard-up, desperate women here in the United States, because we have different economic yes, exactly. So it's relative. And women have to be desperate to actually go through pregnancy, to know that that child, that baby, is going to be handed over, without even being allowed to look at that baby, often without knowing if that baby is a boy or a girl, without being able to hold that baby. And then, sometimes, when the parents can't come and collect their product because they're working and they're very busy and they can't get a flight from wherever, from Europe to California, that woman is sometimes paid more to breastfeed that baby. I'm a woman who's never felt maternal, but I can feel that pain now of what that must be like for that woman to breastfeed that baby, to hand over. And it's cruelty. It's utter cruelty. And I know that there are women who are wheeled out by the commercial surrogacy agencies who say, I feel great because I've done some good. There are women in the sex trade who say that they're just sex surrogates helping disabled men learn how to get pleasure from their bodies. They present as altruistic too. It's the same product. The product is the womb or the vagina, but either way, it's disconnected from the woman as a human being.
It's one of the things that I've admired and been equally mystified by at times by the work that the CDC does, is that you have this feminist ideology and then you have a lot of sort of more conservative ideologies meeting in this space in a kind of a recognition of what I'm just going to call it kind of this human value. That in the same way that Julie is chasing down human value and holding that up in the case of women, like that's the same. You're sort of tapping into that root. This isn't particularly about women just as women. It's women as human beings, which is this, shouldn't be such a radical thought. But strangely enough, we keep having to preach that message. Can you land the plane a little bit for us in terms of this as kind of the heart of what you're after with regards to surrogacy and the work the CDC does? It's not like a political agenda that happens to sort of utilize whoever comes along. You're really trying to hold up and give folks handles on an expression of human value.
Yeah, I mean, our tagline, talks about, our shared common human good and human dignity. And I love the documents that have come out of the European communities that are rejecting all forms of surrogacy. Because they use this strong language of the dignity of women, the dignity of the human body, the dignity of children. So I think that's a strong case. And so we work apolitically. You use the word conservative. I use the word conservative as in conservation, conserving that which is good and preserving that which is good, and not in the political sense, but that we have a shared common good that we are after. And my background is in nursing, so I take a strong lens through all of this of the role of medicine, the role of good medicine, the role of proper medicine, and it really upsets me to see medicine becoming so corrupted by this profit motive industry where they're willing to perhaps harm over here in the hopes of helping over here, and that's a distortion of the proper use and the ends of good medicine and proper medicine. So, we're thrilled that you're here tonight. We're assuming that many of you haven't even thought a lot about the issue of surrogacy, and I'm hopeful that Julie has helped you kind of connect it to the larger problem of prostitution and sex work and the way that the woman's body is commodified and used to ill-gotten ends. And consider going to our StopSurrogacyNow.com website and reading our statement and perhaps joining our movement. And we are a little ragtag team going against a very powerful, multi-billion-dollar a year global industry. But I am the forever optimist.
You may have written down some questions. What I'd like to do is, if Matthew, if you want to make a way to get those up here, and as we
You can pass a basket.
we're going to pass a basket and put some questions in there. And as we do that, where can folks locate you and like find your work and follow your work? The what I called it earlier, the Byline project is fulfilled. Is there a way to continue to support what you're doing?
You can look at byline.com and just put my name in Bindel. I'm very easy to Google because I'm the only Bindel in the UK. So,
Is that right?
yes.
That's fantastic.
There are plenty here. But yes, you can just Google me and you'll find my work on The Guardian or wherever. And if you do want to get in touch after this event, you can, if you're still around afterwards, you can ask me for my email address, which I'm happy to give you, or I'm sure Jennifer from her organisation would send that.
Just really briefly, I think it would be helpful, especially to the people that tuned in on Facebook, if you could each kind of introduce yourselves really briefly and just tell us who you are, just for people that have tuned in since we began.
Certainly. My name is Justin McRoberts, and I'm the host of the @C podcast and the @C event series. And
I'm Julie Bindel. I'm a journalist and a feminist campaigner.
And I'm Jennifer Lahl, the president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture.
Do you want us to tweet this so people will tune in?
Yeah.
Have a
Please.
link to
Oh
it?
yeah, absolutely.
Can you tell
No,
us what
don't.
it is?
yeah,
If you hit the CBC's Twitter, I've been tweeting the link directly to the video, or it's just
Okay.
facebook.com/CBC Network.
Thank you.
Should have said that earlier.
We've gotten several really good questions online. One of them is, and this is an interesting question, what keeps you going? This is so much work, it seems like such hard work. Where do you get the energy and the motivation to keep going?
Is that a question for me?
for you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was too tired, I couldn't answer. Well, I'm part of a global movement of feminist activists, some who work harder than I do, and all of whom are extremely committed. And we're not going to see an end to everything terrible that happens to women in my lifetime, but it is a much better way to live. And you get sustained by the other women who you meet all around the world. Jennifer, colleagues here that just do incredible things. And what's really important, I think, is that to recognise there is a feminist movement in every single country in the world, even if it's 5 women in the most unlikely country that you could imagine would ever have organised feminism, to thousands globally, all of whom are connected in some way or another. For example, I went to Kenya, Africa, a year ago and flew into the Samburu Desert to meet a women-only village, which was a refuge, a women's shelter in the open, of a tribe of women who had had enough of men's violence. They were escaping female genital mutilation, forced marriage, domestic violence, and rape by British soldiers that were stationed there. And they thrive, and they've got international attention, and they're doing brilliant things, and they're educating girls around their communities. And then here I am in California, looking at human rights abuses in an extremely privileged part of the world.
Oh my gosh, we have a bunch of really good questions.
Great, let's dig in.
So I know you can answer this one. She did a great job on the radio the other day. Do you see all surrogacy as immoral? I think that's sort of getting on, the friends helping friends and the altruistic and the desperate.
I look at the commissioning parents, the clinicians, and the profiteers who are profiting from this business. I don't judge the women ever. The women are not in any way culpable. The women are answering, their own desperate needs. Surrogacy is mainly commercial, even if it appears to be altruistic. There's some expenses to be made by desperate women. And yes, I think that we need to reclaim the word moral and immoral. It has been really vilified, for decades as something that is about a kind of very Christian conservative view of the world that is unkind to women, to minorities, etc. I think it's unethical.
Now, part of what you just got to sounds a lot like what a lot of white America is coming to with regards to race. That it's largely a systemic problem that I can't just feel better about because interpersonally I'm okay with my black or brown friends.
Mhm.
That when you're talking about the wrongness of the morality of surrogacy, it's not just a matter of relationship and how I feel between people. It's a systemic problem that dehumanizes folks. There's kind of a parallel, but yes?
It's a system, it's a business, it's like the tobacco industry, it's like the sex trade. It's huge, it's profitable, it's making people very rich and not the women themselves.
Okay, that's good.
Smiling, happy, middle-class women are the main population of U.S. surrogates. Please comment.
That's not
The happy
true.
hooker.
It's not true. You don't agree to this if you don't need the money. Forget that 1%. You just don't. Right? I mean, this you could do a prevalence study. You could interview 2,000 women, for example, who are surrogates from different countries all over the world. And many would say, of course, I'm happily doing this. No, I could have taken another job. And when you drill down and ask what other choices there were, there are no other choices. Now, choice means that there is an alternative. And if you have no other choice, this is what you do. The poster girl is definitely that demographic. Who is going to agree to go on a poster, to have her face on a poster, if she is that desperate woman? Nobody. Imagine the vilification those women get when they're told by their neighbours, I saw you pregnant all those months and I've heard you've sold your baby. Who's going to be public about this if she's that woman?
Can I ask a quick question just in response to that? You use the 1%, talking about the happy, there is the happy hooker. I understand the parallel. Is it really 1% or is it much lower than that, or is that just a number you threw out there?
It's a number I threw out.
Okay, no, I'm sure there's not statistics to it, but
it's just
could it
to
be that high?
yeah, it's to highlight that this is a tiny minority, and we never build policy, opinion, or legislation on a tiny minority. We just don't.
In my experience, because I hear from women all the time either that have sold their eggs or rented out their womb and been surrogates, and for every 10 women who contact me with a negative story, I maybe hear from one. But I'm overwhelming, and that could be biased because of the work that I do, but trust me, there are women out there that want to be the poster child that are happy to tell me that I'm wrong. So it's, again, it's because there's so little regulation and tracking, it's just an under the ground. If the laws and the culture do not change, where does this end?
The further that surrogacy gets normalised, the more that, California will become a tourism destination. And more women will be coerced into this. More and more women will be persuaded that this is a good option, or at least it's an option. And if it's an option to keep you out of poverty and to feed your children, other options will not appear. There'll be inertia. There'll be people who are saying, she could do this. Her children were actually starving. She could have easily taken 9 months' work and had a baby for a desperate couple. This is what it will be. Do we really want this? Do we want this? Do we want to think of our daughters, of young women growing up, that this will be an option that she is offered? Because it will. In Germany, we know that prostitution under a legalised regime, as it's been there for decades, is now seen as, for some poor working class and foreign women, as an alternative to going hungry. Just in the same way as we would balk at the idea of a man desperately trying to get out of a war-torn country in Africa by selling his kidney. We would all want that surgeon to face criminal charges. We would all want that broker to face criminal charges. We would be sympathetic to the man who sold his kidney. We're talking about equivalence here, because the health effects on women are chronic. You've heard that from Jennifer.
They want us to comment on the recent proposal of the World Health Organization, which declares not being the whole issue of the change of the definition of infertility that the World Health Organization came out with. You don't have to be infertile. You can be a single man and be infertile, or an older couple.
Well,
Can you break? Okay, you got to break down like what the actual ruling was. Or...
Well, I mean, in DITA, I don't have it in DITA. What I do know is that, for example, a single man is deemed to be infertile. Yeah, that's about right.
I've always thought about myself that way.
Right.
It goes beyond that, they're calling it a disability.
A disability, that's right. You're absolutely
Which
right.
has to then be accommodated.
So it's a disability also. Now, the World Health Organization has the word health in it, doesn't it? This is not a health issue. Not being able to have a baby is not a health issue. It just isn't. Some people can't. They're men, right? Men can't. Some women can't. It's not that I don't feel sympathy for women who are infertile, don't have children, despite desperately wanting them. I do. I think that we should throw the money that we're actually using to fund IVF on our National Health Service, which we have back home. You had a tiny bit of it is about to go. On counselling and on support for women to find out why some are actually suicidal because they can't give birth to their own baby. I think it's a real tragedy that women feel so worthless and desperate when they can't have it. But single men, I'm sorry, a disability? No, you don't have wombs. And so the idea that the World Health Organization would look at an issue like this when AIDS and HIV is nowhere near being cured or even effectively treated in most countries, and when cancer is just raging through every country in the world, is an abomination. And it's about identity politics and this the skewing of what human rights are supposed to be into individual neoliberal focused rights.
You actually, I mean, to some degree, you're taking a rights issue and making it a health issue, sort of remasking a rights issue and saying it's a health issue, instead of having to actually justify that it's a right that I'm asking for as a relatively privileged person. Absolutely,
there are calls for, on our National Health Service, which thankfully they're rejecting, for those young women who believe they need vaginoplasty because they're looking at pornography and thinking that they don't have the perfect vagina, that they have this corrected by publicly funded surgery, when this is directly as a result of misogynistic pornography and pressure from boys and men, rather than addressing the problem through sex education and through education programs for boys, men, girls and women. We're using the surgeon's knife to correct this. And it's the same with surrogacy. If you make it a right for people who physically cannot get pregnant to go to another womb to grow their pregnancy, what is that saying about colonialism, class privilege, racism, and the most appalling exploitation per se, whether the woman's a white Californian or a poor Indian woman? The World Health Organization has just gone crazy.
All right, this is a very long question, so I'm going to try to do justice to whoever wrote it, so forgive me. But they ask, how do I compassionately and courageously engage with my immediate community, one in which the dominant narrative is that IVF, surrogacy, donor babies, etc. are meeting a right of privileged families? How do I stand against commodification of women and shine light on that in a way that promotes dialogue?
It's a very good question, and I do think that we need to be minded of the fact that some people who wish to access surrogacy services, they're not coming at this from a point of view of not caring about the women, but it will become impossible during the process to empathise with that woman and her problems, because that baby is yours. You've paid for that baby. That woman will be an inconvenience if she gets sick or something happens to that baby. The only way I can think about it is how I've tackled the issue of disabled men who argue that they have the right to pay for sex. There's this big movement to sanitise the sex trade, which says, okay, you've got some returning war veteran. He has been blown up in Iraq. He lost a limb, he's disfigured, he can't get a real date. Poor thing, he can't have sex the normal way. We shouldn't criminalise men paying for sex. or criticise the sex trade, because there are some men, this is the only way that they can do it. Well, I've been in TV studios and in debates like this, where there have been women with disabled sons, in one case in a wheelchair. She was arguing the same, pointing at him like, look, he can't get a real date, which is deeply offensive to disabled people in general. This woman, by the way, bought her son a brothel for his 21st birthday. And saying, what do you do about him? And I say, well, I suppose what we do about men who can't get a date because they're unattractive, they have poor personal hygiene, they don't know how to talk to a woman, or they're just unlucky. I just say, keep trying or give up. But you don't have the right to rent an orifice of another human being. But we have to be
We need to
compassionate.
make shirts that simply say, keep trying or just move on.
Just
That's it.
watch box sets,
Bindel.
right?
Yeah.
There's Netflix.
To keep you company.
There are options.
There's one last question, and I saved it because it pertains to the work of the CBC. It says, how does the recent political change influence the work of the CBC? It doesn't change at all, because actually, quite frankly, no matter who's been in the White House for the 16 years I've run the CBC, who is going into the White House, doesn't give a rat's ass about the work that the CBC does. So we'll just keep doing what we do, and in the spirit of the famous Dorian philosopher, we will just keep swimming. So,
That's a full circle moment right there. Can we thank our guest Julie one more time for being here? Thank you for joining us online. Julie's got her first glass of wine here, so she'll be here for a stretch. Feel free to engage with her. We'll send her out this way. Again, if you join us on Facebook, thanks for your time. Feel free to share this with friends that weren't able to join us during the time we were here. Thanks, Jennifer, for hosting. And if folks want to take a next step in engaging this topic, you're the person to refer to, so maybe give us a couple next steps.
www.stopsurrogacynow.com and join the movement. Get on the bus now.
Excellent. Thank you guys very much.